Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 3. In episode 3, we are going to be talking to Dr. Gavriel Schneider. He's here. He's going to wave. Hello. We're talking about your book, aren't we? I can see your hands. You're a security professional. What on earth led you to writing a book?
A good story behind any book, right? But realistically, after putting a lot of time into the academic side of research and the content, particularly in that book, the content had really came out of the education we were running for lots of our clients on personal safety. The first book was on close protection, which I knew very few people other than a few really focused close protection people would read. I wanted to provide something that anybody who wanted to know how to keep themselves personally safe could apply. And lots of personal triggers for the reason I wrote that, but it was right in the middle of me running a postgraduate program in the psychology of risk. And I actually sat down and wanted to write the book on the psychology of risk. And then kept seeing a worrying trait that, if you look at the big idea of the psychology of risk, it's how we make decisions. Piece missing was people are walking around looking at their phones, not paying attention, and bad stuff happens. Why? Because they're easy prey. And I felt it was really important to address the fundamentals and the basics first. And then the second part to that was being a security advisor, consultant, and loving everything to do with security, feel that the sector is overwhelmed by, let's call them electronic, physical, or cyber sales, people who are driving technical solutions alone and have created the image that you either have to be an expert or you have to buy their solution to stay safe. And it's just not true for most of the cases and most of the success stories we've found. Alert, vigilant, and switch on people are the best defense you can have. Everything else adds to that.
So you've called your book, I Can See Your Hands, but the bad guy's thinking, if I can see your phone, I can take it, right?
Well, it's actually a little play on words. Anybody who's trained in close protection knows that when we work in large crowds, one of the vetting tools you use is whether you can see people's hands or not. And those people whose hands you can't see, there's an assumption they maybe have a weapon or you can't trust them quite as much. So it was just a little linkage back to my history around the way close protectors vet crowds. But it's a good tool for the everyday person to also ask themselves, if I can't see your hands, why? Are you concealing something? Or maybe you're just cold.
Especially if you're in England. So being able to tell whether or not people want to cause us harm is a good theme across the book, isn't it?
It's the primary purpose, right? Because if I can't proactively identify the early warning indicators, both environmentally and from a human perspective, that things could go wrong, my ability to keep myself safe and prevented is minimized. So while I think there's often a lot of focus on, hints, tips, and tricks for people to stay safe, I really wanted to concentrate on a step of fundamentals and a suite of tools that enable you to, when you apply them well, have confidence that you are able to predict out of the ordinary behavior. And it's probably important to remember that the focus is on identifying things out of the ordinary first. And then you've got to classify whether that could be a threat to somebody who's just lost or mentally unstable. But if you don't have the ability to spot any of that, well, then things just happen to you and around you and you become a victim, which is not what we're after.
Let's think about who this book is targeted for. Who is going to have the most amount of benefit when you consider that what you're doing is you're giving everyone a chance to find their inner protective capabilities.
So as my colleague often talks about, in the Colonel Grossman, he talks about being a sheepdog. From my perspective, this book should be targeted at anybody that wants to take control of their own personal safety. And it was a tough write. It would have been much easier to write it only for a specialized security audience. I did feel tested quite early with everybody from teenagers to housewives to the security professional. And it's very, very tough to also write a book that holds up academically and has enough academic integrity that the academics look at it and go, okay, that's a useful text, but still make it readable for the everyday public. So that was the challenge, to do something that was academically sound, that was easy to read, and equally so, a lot of the work in the book has been a synthesis of other pieces of work that some really, really smart, capable people have done before me. So there's no need to invent or reinvent the wheel when you've got things like The Gift of Fear or some of Jeff Thompson's work that contributed to my thoughts on adrenaline. So I also wanted to pay a little bit of homage to those who sort of came before, really redo, translate, and use the tools we found from training hundreds of thousands of people and successfully switching them on in horrible circumstances. My thought with the book was, can't we do that for more people?
So you're really an academic and you're a practitioner. You're an operational operative. You are really a pracademic in the new sense of the word. And you've also created this philosophy, haven't you, around prevention and preparation, which equals resilience. That's your coin phrase. Tell us about resilience.
Thank you, Yo-Yo. Yeah, thank goodness resilience is starting to be understood in the intent that it was originally evolved to. And I'm working on a new book on that. But I think running the businesses and keeping my family happy makes writing a little more difficult than it should be. But resilience was really born out of recognizing the most effective performances when it comes to personal safety. And those most effective performances are usually the performances that, whether it's a combination of human factors, technical solutions, it really doesn't matter how it works. In practice, it's the ability to deter somebody from doing something in the first place, detect them early, respond as early as possible, and deactivate, de-escalate, if not manage the situation. And part of the challenge with getting people to do that is you have to intrinsically motivate people to want to. That's difficult. I did try in the book to weave in a few personal anecdotes and stories and things that I'd seen to help reinforce that. And a really strong driver for me out of that thinking was personal experience. Writing the book, a lot of the subject matter we teach actually evolved out of my stepfather getting murdered in a carjacking in South Africa. And I remember the night incredibly clearly. And one of the things that really frustrated me post-incident was they made all the normal mistakes that the uneducated, non-security person makes. And it really made me realize it doesn't matter how good I am. At that point, I was a world champion in my style of martial arts. I was working as a professional close protector, running a martial arts school, training the army, training the police. But the people that I cared about most didn't have the knowledge to keep them safe in an easily preventable situation. And it resulted in a lot of death and challenge to my family. So I think those people who've been through things like that know it's not good enough to just say, be resilient, it'll be okay, you'll get through it, you just need to be tough. Because coming back is a totally different thing. And bouncing back takes so much more than toughness. So, the old saying, an ounce of cure is worth a ton of protection. It really is true when it comes to extreme violence or extreme violent acts. And I wanted to try and put the tools back in the hand of the everyday person to think and act like a security professional when they have to.
The irony is you probably won't ever really fully understand how far your book has been able to influence the lives that you're really hoping to influence, but I'm sure it does. Well, look, Gav, let's see what they have to say, shall we? Hi everybody, welcome to the indie book review called Turning Pages. This is our third podcast in the series. Make sure you check out podcast 1 featuring Chuck Andrews and his book, Yes Sir, and also podcast 2 where we looked at Mike Kroll's book, The Rise of Security. We will feature in this series several physical security books. We might even go outside the lines. Cybersecurity, maybe, geopolitics, you name it. So the idea is that we publish books written by authors in our community, colleagues in our community. So let's hope that this series helps you wherever you are in your security career. I'd like to think that this will inspire other budding authors and thought leaders and global influencers to have their own books published, maybe creating those new global influencers of the future. The book we're reviewing today is called Can I See Your Hands by Dr. Gav Schneider. So everybody on our panel received a copy of the book and they've had plenty of time to read it and what a read it was. They've all volunteered to be on this panel today. So let's begin by introducing those fellows who chose to review this book. And they're going to tell you, first of all, a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to start off with Farah.
Hi, I am Farah Bennis, coming to you from windy London. I am the managing director of Pepe Security Group, and I oversee and drive the operations of the company. This is my third Turning Pages review, and I am very much looking forward to getting into this episode.
Adrian, let's go to you next.
Thank you, Yolanda. It's great to be back. Farah's sidekick, third time lucky. Bosch. I live in the Shire in Sevenoaks in sunny United Kingdom. I am a security consultant for global engineering firm Barrow Appold, and that's basically me.
It is not a sunny.
What else is it? It's sunny where I am.
It is the most
Not as sunny.
unsunniest of summers. Anyway, let's go on to Ari.
Hi, I'm Ari from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I'm the founding partner for Grupo Aventura, which is a security training and editing company, and a security management consultant for Glover Group.
And an avid book reader. Let's go on to our last and first guest who is new to the Turning Pages podcast, Pam.
Hi, my name is Pamela Chacon. I'm with the MBA CSI. I'm a security consultant, a retired postal inspector of the United States Postal Inspection Service, and I do security upgrade projects for half the United States out of Columbia, South Carolina, where it's very
Awesome.
sunny and warm.
It's good to hear that you've got some nice weather, Pam. Okay, so let's go on to our first question today. I happen to know Gav Schneider, a remarkable man, really, and very relatable to people. And he came over to the UK and gave me a book and inscribed it, and it means a lot. And he has a really interesting backstory. But what I think we're going to do with this first question is look firstly at one of the key pillars he talks about in the book around personal risk management. I'm going to go to each of our reviewers to ask them what they think. The question is, and Ari, you built this question really. I was quite inspired by your feedback. The more complicated the skill, tool, or SOP, standard operating procedures, the greater chance that the individual will not be able to recall it in situations of extreme stress, and the more things can go wrong. Dr. Gav Schneider has written a book that's more than a personal safety book. It's not just a book for protectors. Adrian, let's come to you.
I think the book really builds on previous books that are absolute must read. I think if you from a law enforcement background, I think most people would have read the books on combat and on killing by Dave Grossman, which are absolute must reads for anyone in that industry. For those who've read Gavin de Bakker's book, The Gift of Fear, this book really builds on that knowledge. And depending if you're from a more of the law enforcement side, you will get value if you've read the books on combat. And then if you're more on the civilian side, there's quite a bit that builds on Gavin's books. But I think the best thing about the book in terms of understanding SOPs, and just to relate to your specific question, the book really follows almost like a training manual. I think the way that Gav's written it is that it's got a way of taking personal experience and then it into almost a course that it takes you through in reading the book. Personally, I think I've seen it firsthand in combat where soldiers that are not regular soldiers would, for instance, struggle to open a magazine pouch because they just haven't had the exercise to do so, or have that inbuilt almost second nature of dealing with situations under severe stress. I can definitely recommend, if you haven't read the other two books, if you haven't read the book on combat or you haven't read The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Bakker, I think this is a book that's really building on that experience. And I think if you read all of it together, I think it really builds on the concept of ingraining responses and understanding why your parasympathetic response systems react like they do.
Adrian, some people won't know what parasympathetic responses are. Do you want to just explain for those people who might not have come across that phraseology?
Okay, so your parasympathetic response is basically the system inside your body. You have two systems. You have a parasympathetic and non-sympathetic systems. Those things that are automated and those things that are non-automated. So, for instance, your breathing would be one that's both. You can control your breathing, but it's also something that happens naturally. So it's a different part of your brain that controls a different part of your body. So it's quite significant in soldiers with no parasympathetic backlash. So after you've had an adrenaline dump, you would be lethargic and but you will understand what the impact of adrenaline is. And I think he discusses it in depth in his book. But what a lot of people don't know is that parasympathetic response, your adrenaline discharge, your vascular tension that you get, visual exclusion, tunnel vision, all those things also happens to adversaries. Your robber, for instance, definitely gets affected by adrenaline. It's not something people focus on, but it's something that clearly happens to an adversary. In a robbery, in a burglary, he is under stress. The adrenaline will affect him just as it would a person in combat. So from a security perspective, what Gabs talks about in terms of, I think he talks in two sections. One, he talks about the impact of your parasympathetic nervous system on your body, but it also takes a view from the adversary's perspective to say, listen, if you think about like the adversary, these are some of the things that we need to see and think about. It's something critical to understand. If you're in security, understanding the parasympathetic nervous system is critical to not just your security guards, but also to your adversary, and understanding what you will go through, because that will affect your own SOPs and systems that you're designing.
Ari, let's see what you have to say. And you helped to build this question. I really loved your feedback about the book. Tell me what you think.
Sure. I really like this quote. The more complicated a skill, the more difficult it will be to recall it, and the more things can go wrong. And I felt this in my heart as I was reading it, because there are so many instances where people seem to forget about this, especially in consulting. Sometimes you receive a security procedure or emergency plan that only the expert that made it might understand. But ultimately, the people that need to apply those plans and procedures are the ones that will have to understand them and remember them. And they would have to do it at a comfortable desktop, but rather in the field when their lives or their jobs may be in danger. It also reminds me of this quote that is attributed to at least two different popular scientists, who are Richard Feynman and Albert Einstein, which basically states, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And through this book, you can easily realize that Dr. Schneider deeply understands what he's talking about and has the ability to explain it in a perfectly clear and simple manner. And especially, it's not an easy feat to communicate and teach skills, not only security professionals like us, but also to the general public.
I think that's a very good point. Okay, Farah, we're going to come to you for your perspective now.
Dr. Schneider mentions the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. So, and I love that. He understands that in high stress situations, complexity is your enemy. I think his approach is designed to be straightforward so that anyone, not just security professionals, can remember and apply the principles. And I think this universality is why the book serves a broader audience. So it's not just about teaching complicated maneuvers or using specialized equipment. It's really just imparting simple, effective skills and mindset changes that anyone can integrate into their daily lives to enhance their safety and well-being. As a small business owner, I can often be found juggling multiple concurrent incidents at a time, and sometimes with staff who may not be familiar with new sites. So it's the abiding principle by which all of our SOPs are put together, and I definitely apply it to my management of most situations and people. It's universal.
Farah, you kind of reminded me that when I read the book, I kind of got this principle that what Gab teaches you is to think with your brain first. Do you know what I mean? So he's teaching, how to protect yourself without teaching techniques and complicated moves and things like that. He's just teaching you skills to use your brain first, isn't he?
Absolutely. Keep it simple, stupid.
Cheers, don't call me stupid.
Pam?
So this book really, like, it resonated with me a lot because I had been a a law enforcement officer for 20 years as a postal inspector, and a lot of our training and our stress training, and so much of it, it's learning simple concepts, but then practicing them. So the fact that he created like very sound little bites of information that you could translate and apply in your personal life. And then his emphasis of utilizing it and engaging with it is really important because, like everyone has stated prior to me here, when it's stressful, when things happen, your reactions are going to be much different than even if you've been very prepared. It just stress will do that to you. But when, the muscle memory will kick in and you will somehow, like when it's simple, you can engage and you can act the way you need to be safe and to go home alive.
When I was in the police, part of the training we did in the early days was to practice handcuffing in the dark. And what they used to do is they used to make us run around the gymnasium quite a way so we were out of breath. They didn't tell us that they were going to turn the lights out. We had to find our partner in the dark room. And then we had to handcuff them following procedure. Of course, we were all out of breath. Our fingers were turning to jelly. Our commands weren't very succinct. And the lesson
Yep.
was, he said, right, now we're going to do that again. Now you know what you need to be doing. And it's about understanding where you were when you had no idea what was going on and what you were thinking about, what you were processing, where you were struggling. And then, of course,
Yeah.
when we did it the second time, we were absolutely 100% on point because we understood how our bodies had reacted initially in that kind of red mist phase. Yeah, very valuable. So on to the next question then. So this next question really is, look, it's about situational awareness. It literally threads its way all the way through Gav Schneider's book because he's basically saying that without this, you can't be in any way protective of yourself or others. So let's talk about where situational awareness related to you in the book and also relate that to something maybe in your own experience, your own life. Adrian, coming to you.
I think one of Gav's other things that he's coined in the last couple of years is enhanced decision making. And I think the ultimate goal of situational awareness is the ability to make better decisions. I think it's not just in a situation where you need to fight for your life, but having the ability to read the situation is a very important skill. Especially if you deal with C-level executives, for instance, they will definitely require the ability from you to be able to assess the situation and provide them with the necessary information for them to make decisions. Not just in terms of something that's happening with you personally in a situation where you might need to defend yourself, but in my personal life, I've had to deal with a lot of big emergencies, flooding, mass lootings, kidnappings, robberies, etc. And people will look at you as a security professional and depend on you to make decisions. And in that moment, you can't then start thinking about getting situational awareness. If you need to have a very good finger on the pulse, know what's going on, so that you can influence decision makers to make the right decisions. It was something that was quite critical in my career as a soldier. In reconnaissance, you are the eyes for the commanders. You need to be able to provide them with information so they can make decisions. So I really love what Gav's doing in terms of decision making. It's not about looking backwards in terms of gathering data. So going more than just on self-defense, but also looking at how do we prepare for the future? How do we become more resilient? And resilience, the big part of resilience is that ability to get information and having good situational awareness.
Give us an example, Adrian, of a situational awareness that would be relatable to somebody maybe outside the security profession.
I think any person who drives a car would need to have would know it. I think it's not the fact that it's one of those things that I think is unconscious. I've trained quite a lot of people, also myself, outside the security industry. And especially when we start talking about understanding situational awareness, if you start talking to them about the body language and things, people know it. You're just making them aware of the skill that they have. And I think Gav speaks about it, but Gavin de Backer also speaks about your internal nervous system. You do have the skills. It's that you're consciously overriding your natural inbuilt ability to assess danger and assess the situation. We are consciously overriding these skills that we've been given through evolution, in a sense. But the moment you start consciously thinking about, oh, that's interesting. Why is there a quiet person sitting in a corner talking to or winking to someone outside that's looking very suspect? You have those skills internally. It's understanding to act on them and realize what's going on. And I think that's definitely a skill for everyone that they need to possess, and they have actually.
I mean, you use driving a car, but as soon as you said that to me, I'm like, there's an awful lot of people that don't have situational awareness that are driving cars on the road, Adrian.
I'm not driving with you anyway.
Oh, yeah, it's safe. It's safe. I'm an ex-police car driver and I
Ah.
never got into any scrapes in a police car, put it that way. I'm coming over to you now, Ari. Tell me what your thoughts are around situational awareness.
Sure. I loved every tip in the book. I love them all. Excellent. And they're obviously clearly sustained and rooted by both the author's previous explanations. So he builds up toward the tips instead of just presenting the tips disjointed from the book. Actually, the culmination of the chapter, which I liked, really appreciate that. And also they obviously rooted in his experience, just like Adrian said before. There's one particular tip from the appendix, which I thought was phenomenal, which says, showing you're actively aware, but turning your head and looking around creates a significant deterrent. And I actually copied this from an espionage show as a teenager, even a bit before deciding to become a security professional. I was and am still living in Buenos Aires, which is ultimately not the safest city to live in, and have personally been the victim of or witness of many crimes or otherwise undesirable situations, right? Both minor and serious, which again is not an uncommon occurrence. But once I started using my nonverbal behavior to express awareness of my surroundings, such as doing a quick room scan while opening a door, or being noticeably attentive to suspicious pedestrian behaviors, such as people unnecessarily crossing a street, I quickly noticed that all sorts of uncomfortable and dangerous situations simply stopped happening around me. Arguably, because strangers saw my level of attention and watchfulness before even getting to approach me. And while I could never factually prove it, I believe that this also has a positive effect on the safety of the people around me, even if I don't know them at all. If I were to explain this following the book's analogy, I'd say it's something like when the wolf notices a sheepdog around, it may decide not to mess with the sheep around them.
I really enjoyed listening to that. And you're absolutely right. Because you've used also a situation to relate to where you had to raise your own situational awareness. I think coming to Farah, I mean, look, as women, I think many of us have grown up since little girls with it being drummed into our heads. Situational awareness has been about don't walk down dark alleys and make sure you wear sensible shoes and hold your keys in your hand as you walk back to the car park in the dark and all of those sorts of things. So, okay, let's move on to you, Farah. See what you have to say about situational awareness.
As both Adrian and Ari have rightly said, the value of understanding and having situational awareness can't be overstated. I think it's one of those cornerstone skill sets that goes beyond the boundaries of just personal safety, and it really encompasses every aspect of life. So I think it allows you to read a room, gauge the motivations of people around you, understand the dynamics of different environments as well. And these skills are valuable whether you're conducting a security assessment for a client or you're walking through a dark parking lot at night. I think in my experience, I found that being situationally aware has not only helped me in professional settings to preemptively identify security risks, but it's also been crucial in my personal life. I found myself in situations where reading body language and understanding social cues have helped me avoid potentially unsafe scenarios. I thought a lot about this in terms of my women's safety work, and you've touched on that. I often see criticism to those who provide safety tips, saying that it puts the onus onto potential victims rather than perpetrators. And while I completely agree that the focus should always be on preventing people from committing crimes in the first place, we have to acknowledge that we don't live in a utopia. We all bear some personal responsibility for our own safety, irrespective of our gender. Ignoring that fact doesn't make anyone safer. In fact, I think it does the opposite. So that's why situational awareness is so vital. I think it empowers individuals to take control over their own safety in the here and now without undermining the ongoing need for broader societal change. You know, in this imperfect world, disregarding situational awareness and self-protection strategies, it might feel empowering to some, but it's actually quite risky. I think we can and we should be working towards creating a safer society, but it's also essential that we equip ourselves with the practical tools to navigate our current environment. So to me, situational awareness stands as one of those completely indispensable tools.
Thank you so much for that, Farah. I really appreciate it. And Pam, how are things done in the States that you would say could be slightly different, do you think, or with your background, in law enforcement?
So I would say, it's a situation of action always beats reaction. So situational awareness gives someone a bit of an edge in the sense that you are engaged, you are aware of what's happening, and you can react, respond, versus being completely unaware of what's happening. And then you're thrown into, a very bad situation or an awkward situation. Again, it transcends beyond like personal safety. As Farah has said, it becomes a personal thing of late, where in the area that I live in, South Carolina, there's a fair amount of homeless here in the downtown area. And just being situationally aware sometimes it's a good thing. Oftentimes there's not any real threat, but you just don't know because you don't know if someone is not well, they're in a desperate situation and they may act out in a way, because they need it for personal gain. But situational awareness, I think, is at the end of the day, it's a lifesaver because, so often people, they can attribute it back to having like that gut feeling or that sense that just something wasn't right and acting upon it. And I think Dr. Schneider here, he really offers up a very practical, useful, his summaries at the end are excellent, kind of emphasizing those points. And I think, it becomes a very practical, very useful way for somebody outside to just put it into, application.
A lot of people are interested in crime novels, aren't they? Crime movies and the works of the likes of Lee Child, for example, extra special forces skills. And all they're doing really is demonstrating at the top end layers of situational awareness that people, just normal day-to-day lives. Yeah. So in fact, if you want to understand situational awareness, just read one of Lee Child's books and it will have a nice, interesting story, usually a hot woman. He always wins at the end of the day. Anyway, no, thank you so much. Brilliant. Okay, let's come on to question number 3 now. Question number 3. For those of you that know Dr. Gav Schneider, you'll know that he's coined this phrase prosilience. And we can determine that comes from the combination of 2 words commonly known in security. But why is prosilience important in this context? Coming to you first, Adrian, especially for security practitioners.
So coming back to your driving skills, Yolanda, to make an example, have you ever had to change a tire, a vehicle, a car tire?
Yes, I pride myself to be one of those who can.
It's probably a good example to use, is a vehicle tire. Now, for most people in the world, if you have a flat tire, you find the AA and someone's going to come and fix your car, etc. If you come from South Africa, like me and Gav, if you have a flat tire, it can result in your death. In either, you could be either very rural, where a flat tire can cause you to be away from civilization, that can cause trouble, or you can be around one of the cities where they actually spike the roads and attempt to have the car stop. So understanding how to change a car tire is quite critical, but it's something that's quite simple to do. And for me, that's a good example of how to explain Brazilian. If you know the risks are there, it's easy to take the steps to prepare in case those risks happen. To use a car tire again, know how the car actually works. Most car tires have a special key for some of the nuts. Is one there? Is the car tire inflated? It's very simple drills that you can do just to make sure that if something happens, you're in a situation to deal with the situation. And I think that's what, and to keep it short, that is what resilience is. It's not about being paranoid. It's understanding the risk, and it's understanding how do I deal with that risk. And I think one of the points that he makes in the book is that 80% of the incidents are avoidable. You can definitely avoid the problems of a flat tire if you make sure that your spare wheel works, that you know how to change a tire, etc. So as an analogy, I think that's in short what I would refer to as resilience.
Thank you, Adrian. I'm just going to refer to page 25, and we've discussed this, Ari, certainly in the last book with Mike Kroll's The Rise of Security. Ari, I'm just going to read a part here. Gav Schneider says, most of us go about everyday lives continuing with these bad habits about being absolutely paranoid about issues like crime or terrorism. In reality, when compared to our health, most other threats, risks, and hazards have far lower chance of actually killing us. Other risk issues, such as being attacked by a shark, become issues of dramatic concern when we think of swimming in the ocean. I mean, I don't know anyone who's ever swum in the ocean and not once thought about Jaws, or whether there's a shark or something slippery and big with teeth below by your feet, thanks to Jaws. And so he says, in reality, we are far more likely to get struck by lightning, and we know how rare that is, or hit by a car, or even killed by a falling coconut because they fall from a height. And you have a sunbed under them. It literally can kill you. When we look at statistical causes of death, when it comes to assessing risk, our goal should be to put it into perspective. What do you have to say about perspective and resilience, Ari?
Well, I have to be completely honest. The first time I glanced at the word resilience, I thought maybe it was redundant or superfluous. If we're aiming at resilience, shouldn't we already be proactive about it? But then I read more about it in this book and understood how valuable of a concept it is. It relates to two things. One is that, as you mentioned with the case of statistics and such, is that the way to strive for productivity is building resilience from acceptance instead of denial of the risks we face daily. And denial also comes in the form of misreading or misunderstanding the proportions of risk, right? And the other concept for resilience that I liked and thought it was valuable was that it is applied directly into VUCA context, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous context, which makes it a really versatile way of thinking.
Thank you, Ari. That's very insightful. So now we're going to come over to Farah. Farah, what resonated with you in relation to resilience?
Having grown up in Uganda and worked extensively across Africa, I liked Adrian's example of the car tire. It's a simple, straightforward one, but in certain environments, it could be life or death. And if you drive, you should know how to change a tire. I really liked this idea, the merging of preparedness and resilience. I think it captures the essence of proactive risk management. In the context of the book, I think this concept is critical because it shifts the focus from mere reaction to a very well thought out anticipatory approach. Security isn't just about responding to threats as they occur. It's about having the foresight to prepare for them and the resilience to bounce back when they do happen. So I think for security practitioners, embracing this idea of resilience elevates our roles from being reactive forces to becoming strategic assets. It encourages us to be constantly alert and equips us with the mental and tactical agility to adapt to various scenarios. So by adopting this mindset of resilience, we can preemptively identify vulnerabilities, formulate thorough plans, and really just contribute more effectively to the safety and well-being of individuals and organizations. I think in our ever-evolving landscape of security threats and challenges, it provides us a robust framework, which makes it indispensable for anyone who's serious about security.
All right, Pam, we're going to come to you for your thoughts around this new word, resilience.
So I thought that was a really interesting concept that he coined this word around the concept of prevention and resilience. And then the breakdown that he offers is also very aligned with his ideology that he's promoting in the book on being thought forward, being preventative in nature, planning, situational awareness, all these things lean into that 80% of prevention and awareness. And then also giving some thought to how are you going to act and respond and take action, and then how are you going to recover. So yeah, I like this a lot. I thought it gave you a lot to think about. It was a unique word, and it works. It totally works.
I think one of the things I liked about it is that nowadays we have learned to understand that minds work differently. You know, when you consider the scale of neurodiversity, the capability of being able to plan and do things in advance varies and can vary very much around the sort of skill set, our cultures, our own ideologies, and our own personal responsibility. This is just a great tool book. Like if you read that and you know what's in that book, you can already feel, like I said to Gav in the initial interview, you won't ever know how many people you've helped. But it's a nice thing knowing that there's something out there that really does help people.
Yeah, it's very empowering. And I think it came from a place of heart because it came from his personal experience. Then
Yeah.
he was able to take that, translate it, and make it into, you know, bites of knowledge that he has shared and he has really expounded upon in such a very clear way. I mean, it's good stuff. It really is.
Thank you, Pam. So let's go on to question 4. Being able to tell whether or not people want to cause us harm is a good theme right across the book. But Adrian, what did you learn that was impactful for you? I mean, you've come from South Africa. We've talked in depth around what it's like to be in security in a high risk environment. And you've come from a background where there's a high risk to life in certain areas. So I should imagine your experiences will be somewhat aligned with Gav's.
For sure, it is in if you're in Mordor and not in the Shire. But I think it does go beyond that. I think we've discussed on a number of occasions, especially in male relationships, this hierarchy, and there's always violence on the table. There's always that option that if you go too far, there's a high sense of violence that's on the table. What Gav does in the book is he actually qualifies that when should you do what, in a sense. I think a good example is, if he mentions, you need to assess whether this is a survival situation or if this is just someone's ego. And I think he goes to, especially with his real life experience and also with his martial arts experience, he gives practical advice on how to deal with both, whether an egotistical situation where it is about hierarchy leading to violence, where there may be alcohol involved or rugby scores or anything like that. But he definitely then goes and in a lot of detail, and we haven't really discussed it, but he does go into a lot of detail and give a lot of advice on exactly what to do, how to assess whether it is in fact a survival situation, and then how to deal with it once it happens. So, and I think that's what's building on some other older books. It doesn't really explain what to do. It tells you what's happening to your body, but it doesn't tell you what to do afterwards. What Gav does is he says, okay, you've now realized that you're in a situation, do this, be prepared. So go and learn how to do X, Y, and Z. So very practical. I enjoyed that quite a bit.
I think being able to tell whether someone's going to cause you harm or not has got to be based a little around intuition as well as tools and skills. I remember after spending a year living in Barbados, I flew into Heathrow and I was walking across the car park with my suitcase and a lone man was walking towards me. For the first time, I felt like I needed to be more aware about my surroundings and where the exit was and where I needed to run to. I don't know what it was. It was just purely instinctive that I can be in one country and feel safer and then come back and in that split second know that I was alone and potentially more vulnerable. Adrian, you must have noticed coming in from South Africa and now living in beautiful England that, or beautiful, not so sunny England, that, your knowledge that you have is maybe superfluous to what is required to live here in the UK, certainly. What do you think about that?
Well, my kids remind me every now and again how easily it is to steal. Yeah, not because they have an intent to steal. It's there's just no. The consequence is quite different. No, there's. I think what you see is the opposite that happens is when people from, let's say, developed countries come over to third world countries or less developed countries. They simply doesn't have that skill set how to listen to the inner voice that you have and stay out of trouble. The Cape Town is amazing, and I think there's a lot of places that's much safer than it is in the UK or in any other of the 46 countries I've been to. But I think what you do get if you grow up in an environment that is more challenging is that you get an ingrained, built-in ability to assess a situation, and because it's muscle memory in a sense. You've seen this movie play before, so you know how to deal with it. And I think that assists a lot of people in understanding. I think, especially in a security management perspective, if you need to physically go through the actions. If I take it back to the car tire example, you need to physically do the things to know this is how it works. You can't just think in your head, that's how I'm going to do it. You might not have the strength to move the tire, for instance. So real life, in more challenging countries, you are going to get that experience, and that builds resilience in a big sense. But like I said, it's rather going from the Shire to Mordor than the other way around.
Okay, I'll take your word for it, Adrian. Thank you. Ari, coming over through to you then for your words around being able to tell whether people can cause us harm or not. How does that sit with you in Argentina? For many of us who've never been to Argentina, we wouldn't understand your perspectives.
Yes. Well, in Argentina, we are usually very aware of, at the very least, the nonverbal behavior of people in the street, to the point where a lot of times we maybe watch videos of a crime happening in a different country, maybe in the US or Europe or something like that. And maybe we're watching CCTV footage or such, and we wonder how come no one realized something bad was going to happen, because we have gotten so good at that because of our crime and such, or rather our perceived crime rate, because we are not necessarily the most insecure country, not even in Latin America.
Are you saying then that you're more exposed to crime in Argentina than we probably would have imagined?
Yes, or at the very least, our perception of exposure is higher. And I think that when I decided to become a security professional, I started learning about all these tools that are in Gap's book, like the Cooper color codes and the run, hide, fight, communicate, and all of these. But then it always felt to me like those tools are all disjointed, right? I didn't know when to apply them exactly, or at least when to communicate it to other people. And because it's hard to ask someone, apply this at all times, every day, at every moment. It's hard to do that. But then I came across in this book with the 3-checkpoint system, 3-point check system. And it's great. It's based on scanning your surroundings, the people there, and what's happening at the time. And it's an amazing way to organize your thoughts regarding risk and safety and incorporate all these other tools that are in the book or that we generally know as security professionals. And it so much to the point that it may seem obvious. And I think that when the concept someone's proposing is so clear and logical that it makes the learners, or in this case, the readers, feel that it may be obvious, that's a good indication that of how compatible it is with people's way of thinking.
Oh, Ari, that's so articulately, beautifully said. Thank you so much. Okay, Farah, your background is entirely different as well, especially when you talked earlier about growing up in Uganda and working across Africa. How does this question about being able to tell whether or not people want to cause us harm or not relate to your personal experiences?
I think this idea of discerning people's intentions ties back quite neatly to the discussions and my lane on women's safety. I think one impactful lesson that stood out for me was the idea of understanding behavioral cues and how essential that is in assessing potential threats. I think this level of awareness kind of goes back beyond mere paranoia and into a more informed, nuanced understanding of human behavior, which can be a really powerful tool in personal safety efforts. So I think it adds this extra layer of empowerment and aligns perfectly with the need to equip ourselves with practical skills for navigating the world as it exists today, rather than in this idealized future.
Thanks, Flora. Maybe I just wanted to add, I think there might be a perspective that we're only focusing on an incident that might happen in the street, but I think it's also very relevant to an insider threat. It's not just recognizing the thug on the street. I think, Yolanda, you're pointing towards something that we can recognize as a person approaching you in a dark alley. But the same things apply to a insider threat or to a person that might be more of a white collar crime. And maybe I don't know, from your experience, I think that's something that you can maybe talk about, because I think definitely it's not just on individual safety specifically. I know we focus on that, but being able to see the threat, it can be in an office space. And I just want to say it's not just hardcore third world countries.
I 100% agree with you. It's everywhere. I think really understanding and being able to understand the nuances of human behavior allows us to better judge any situation and people. And that gives us a measure of control and proactive preparedness in how we deal with situations. So I think, no, you made a really valid point. It's also not always just about these extreme examples that we see. It's also about, those smaller ones closer to home as well.
Yeah, thank you both of you. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, Pam. So look, your environment, and this is why you've all been selected for the book review, because of your different perspectives and certainly in relation to your geographical different perspective. Pam, what would you have to say around being able to identify whether someone wants to do us harm or not? Because it's such a big theme across the whole book.
Yeah, it is. It's a big theme. It's something that I think for the most part, but a lot of people, they like to believe that other people think like them, but they have no idea what's going on in somebody else's mind or what their circumstances are emotionally, mentally. Just, they could be at the end of their rope. I mean, again, to Farah and Adrian's point, insider threat. I can remember we had a situation many years ago when I was an agent. We were going to be going to do a search warrant, and one of the other agents was really emotionally raw. He was having like a breakdown. He was dealing with a personal issue at home, and he was really in no mindset to be going in to doing a search warrant. And he more or less had like a breakdown. And I said, you really need to go and let the team leader know, because you shouldn't be going with us like this, because his reaction to the circumstance could also bring about undue harm to us, to other people, where it shouldn't be. And he didn't want to do it. And I said, well, I'm going to do the right thing. I went and I told the team leader, I said, he's really not in any mindset to be going with us on this operation, because he's just so raw. And so they found another role for him that he wouldn't be, in that, first confrontational situation where, you never know what could go on, but he might not have reacted right. And that could have been a really awful situation. So That's where, sometimes harm can come from a circumstance that we're not even realizing. Like, it could be a situational thing because of a person's mindset, not necessarily a perpetrator out there out to do attack or steal, rob, something like that.
Pam, if I may, just exploit the fact that you're based in America, because I'm aware of the incident fairly recently, within the last couple of months, where the young bank worker went into the bank. And we have to start asking ourselves the question, as practitioners, because a lot of people remarked afterwards that they found him to be quite withdrawn, quite sarcastic. Maybe there were some red flags that were spotted when we look at that type of insider threat. So if those people, knowing what they know now, had the skill set to be able to tell whether or not somebody wanted to potentially cause them harm or not, it could literally change landscapes, couldn't it? And change lives.
It absolutely could. So often, I mean, before I became an inspector, I was a manager for 10 years in the Postal Service. And, the term going postal, I mean, I take personal offense because we get a lot of publicity because we touch every single household in America. The Postal Service is one of those things that you either go to your post office box to get your mail, or you have a carrier, or everybody to some degree has some level of engagement. So it gets a lot of, notoriety for the term. But so many situations, it's how they're handled and, management handling things a proper way, and people being willing to speak out and say, I noticed something unusual, and being willing to step up and share that they picked up on some cues that a person was behaving a particular way, or, their behavior was a little bit off, could definitely change many circumstances. I mean, that can play a significant role. Maybe the meds are not titrated properly for them. But again, a lot of it's just the sensitivity and awareness and how someone is treated, in various circumstances that can make all the difference in the world.
Okay, well, listen, Pam, that's a fabulous way to move on to the next question, which will be our last question. So, coming to you first, then, Adrian, tell us why being activated is important in Gav's definition, and also give us an example of your own safety routine.
What it means to be activated.
Could you explain then for everybody what being activated means?
Yes, Yolanda, I think Pam, and to use Pam's example, it's acting on an information that you see. And she's given a good example there of a team member that was clearly not in the right place to be at a specific time in his life, and she acted on it. So I think basically what it means is acting on your instincts. Or, if you're in the UK, and you travel on the train, all the time, if you see something, say something, get it sorted, but I think personally, it's very different if you come from a military or a defense background. Gav does talk about it in his book, is that it's almost the sense that it's something that people that's been working in the security industry, especially if you've been in a combat area, you almost have an ingrained sixth sense. What people don't realize is that you often also get that responsibility. When you have that ability, when you've had the training and you've had the experience, you often also carry the burden of being the person to act. You often are the person that people look to. And so you walk differently in the street because there's a self-inflicted responsibility to be the person that's able to deal with situations and able to identify that situation. I don't have a specific routine. I think it's just something that's been drilled into you for generations, but it becomes a burden. And I think that's what Gav talks about, the sheepdog, and it can weigh on certain people.
So late at night, being the man of the house, then, are you telling me that you don't go around and check all the doors in your house to make sure, doubly sure, that everything's locked and secure before you go to bed? Because that would be
Yeah,
a
but
safety routine, right?
maybe I thought that was normal. I don't think that's a safety routine, but there's some strange people. I don't think maybe it's a routine. I don't see it as a routine. I think that's just normal. I don't know if it's something that's, maybe referring to something that's conscious. Do I have anything that I do consciously? I don't think of something I do consciously. Maybe it's something that's unconscious, knowing to lock the door, not to go in places you shouldn't go.
Habits.
So habits, maybe it's habits. Good. Yeah,
And
yes, I agree.
I have to also add that there are plenty of women of the house who would also have that task of making sure everything's locked at the end
Yes,
of the night. This is
agree.
not a gender specific role. I just saw you being the type of person who would probably do it in your household, but I might be wrong.
The kids. We have lots of kids. We send one. If we lose one, there's two more.
Excellent. Okay, Adrian, thank you so much. Right, so I'm going to bring in Ari. What does becoming activated and safety routines mean to you, Ari?
Well, the first, I'm going to start with the safety routine. One that's ingrained in my brain is to hide my keys from photos or videos and such. Because I just saw like one conference years ago where with just one very far away picture from a key, they were able to copy it and then, spy on a house of a suspect. And they had a warrant, but obviously criminals can do it without a warrant or any good intentions. And this is something that I pass along to my family, and especially because I have some people in my family or friends that may have a lot of followers on Instagram and such. And perhaps they can post a picture that seems innocent of their house, but maybe they have their keys hanging on the wall or something like that. And with that picture, you can easily copy that. So that's something I pass along all the time. As for becoming activated, there's a quote I really like from the book that talks about unleashing your inner sheepdog. Is about utilizing your eyes and ears with a real sense of awareness and assessment capability. And you're passing relevant information onto people to keep themselves safe and to keep you safe. So this completely resonated with me for two reasons. The first one is that as a security professional, this is everything as I try to be, right? Whether it's through consulting, training, or editing, I try to make the work a bit more secure, right? One project at a time. The second reason I like this quote is that this viewpoint aligns perfectly with how John Rodriguez, who is a great colleague and the global expert on the subject, will define the components of security culture. If everyone takes measures to protect themselves, shares information to their peers so that they can protect themselves as well as our families, organizations, or communities, then everyone gets to feel safer in a sort of contagious way. So I fully believe that if both security pros and the general public can apply the lessons from App's book, will be truly helping to make the world a safer place.
And a great name check to our fellow comrade, John Rodriguez, as well. We'll have to tag him in when we share this. Right. Okay.
Of course.
Right. So coming over then to you, Farah, to talk about the same, if you don't mind.
Adrian, Ari, and yourself, Yo-Yo, have picked up the reference to becoming activated as tapping into your inner sheepdog, which was a reference I liked because my Lou is a Hungarian pulley, which is Hungary's national sheepdog. And she may be medium and fluffy, but she is fierce. Let me get back on track. Tapping into your inner sheepdog, this idea of shifting from a passive state to one of heightened awareness and proactive engagement with your environment. So it's not about becoming paranoid, but about becoming fully aware, assessing risks, and passing on relevant information to people who can act upon it. Personally, I found this concept resonant, especially when considered alongside my professional duties and my personal experiences. I think this notion of becoming activated is like turning on a switch that elevates your situational awareness and helps you to become a much more active participant in your own safety, as well as in the safety of your community. So I think it encourages this sense of shared responsibility and collective security, ideas that are really central to my own philosophy and practice. So I think for me, becoming activated encapsulates this holistic approach to safety and security, not just for professionals in the field, but also for everyday individuals who are part of larger communities. I think it promotes, a proactive and really empowered stance that can genuinely contribute to a safer world for all of us. And on your second point on safety routines, I think that they're presented as a combination of learned skills and protocols that really should become second nature, like muscle memory. And the idea is to create this automated but flexible set of responses to potential threats, thereby really enhancing your personal safety and, again, contributing to community security. I completely agree that having that kind of awareness can create this contagious sense of security within a community. Because if one person is vigilant and aware, it can influence others to do the same. And this collective level of situational awareness creates an environment where threats are much more likely to be recognized and addressed before they escalate. So it's a ripple effect. One person adopts good safety routines, it can influence family, friends, and even casual acquaintances to examine and perhaps improve their own practices. So I think the normalization of these routines within a community can significantly contribute to a collective sense of security and well-being. So yes, cultivate safety routines as advocated in the book. It not only empowers the individual, but it has the potential to foster a much safer community at large.
And I think to your point, Sarah, I'm going to mention this. As a result of Parsons Green terrorism incident, there were 2 women on that tube, and one had a certain level of training around terrorism and counterterrorism measures and personal safety. And the other woman was what you would call general member of the public without any exposure to any specialist knowledge. And it turned out that both of the women were spoken to after the incident and several months after the incident. And the one woman who hadn't had any exposure to any special tools or skills had actually suffered worse in relation to mental health, anxiety, and depression. So I think even though we still live in this environment where we can't feel 100% complacent and safe because we are still under the caveat of a raised threat alert for terrorism, for example, certainly in Northern Ireland, having the knowledge certainly helps our own well-being, doesn't it?
I 100% agree. It's about equipping ourselves with tools that will help us better handle any situation, however it may be.
Thank you, Farah. Appreciate that. Okay, let's come over to final comments to Pam, and then we'll round robin. Pam, tell us about, from your perspective, around personal habits. Sorry, let me just refer back to the same question. Sorry, around becoming activated, what that means to you, what you took from the book, and safety routines.
Okay. So for me personally, being activated is being engaged, being aware, if you see something, say something, and actually acting upon it, because realizing that it can make a difference. It can potentially save lives or thwart an incident, potentially, to allow the people who need to respond in whatever circumstance you might be, whether it be in the subway, at the airport, somewhere. So being activated is applying these concepts and being willing to practice them, put them to use, and participate in it in an ongoing manner. For me personally, as an agent, I worked a lot with a lot of old school guys when I first started in the late 90s. And going out to a restaurant, you'd never sit with your back to the door, because most of the time I was carrying a weapon and plain clothes. So it wasn't obvious that I was carrying, but that situational awareness of where was your weapon, should you have to react to a set of circumstances. Not necessarily that each one would require a gun, but just knowing where that was. And just, yeah, going into various places. My daughter lives in Midtown Manhattan, going to visit her in the city, just walking around town, making sure that I'm not on my phone the whole time, that I am engaged. If I have earbuds in, it's only one earbud so I can hear what's going on around me. Different things like that. Simple things, but less likely you're going to be a victim than somebody who's a little more kind of just self-absorbed or tuned out, or just they're not aware of their surroundings. It's been proven they've done studies on it where the people who were disengaged or very absorbed in what they were doing, mindlessly going about, they could potentially become more likely a victim than somebody who was paying attention, as Ari had said, giving it that 360-degree look around, going into a room, scanning the room. So,
And it's interesting, actually, Pam, listening to you and listening to you to your point around the 360 looking around, because if you've got mental health issues, or if you're deeply emotionally distressed, or even just not feeling your normal self, that can have a massive impact, can't it, on that 360-degree perspective?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
Okay.
taking care of yourself too, not to allow this to, it's not that it's being aware and being active is one thing, but also managing stress, taking care of yourself, not allowing this to become like a fear mongering scenario to you, but more of an empowerment that you can. And I think these are all very, like the tool set that he offers here. It is very practical to for schools, houses of worship, various entities, community centers, large places where people gather. If people, share this knowledge, it really could, it's simplistic enough, but it's got a lot of bang for the buck.
Yeah.
If he really puts together a beautiful package of information that's concise and it's practical.
And also, there's a little summary after each chapter. There's lots of really cool headings to keep everything concise. You know exactly what you're going to be reading. So he kind
Yeah.
of tells you what you're going to be reading. Then he tells you what he wants to tell you. And then he summarizes at the end what he's just told you, which is an incredibly good communication technique anyway, to use both verbally and in books. But this is a tool. It's a key to life, I think, in a
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, thank you, Pam. Thank you so much. I'm just going to whiz around all of you, see if you've got any last minute words. Maybe there's something you've not been able to mention. And so you've each got like a minute now just to summarize your thoughts about the book in your own words. So, Adrian, I'm coming to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Yolanda. Look, I've been a supporter of Gavriel for many years, way before I've read his book. He's a remarkable person with a remarkable set of skills. And this book really takes that knowledge, and we had the ability to take all that experience and the effort that he's put into life to put it in a book. I think the book, however, is for people, or for sheepdogs. It's a book for those who do read the likes of Grossman and the Becker and who want to be in control of their own destiny. I think it might not be for everyone to read. I think the skills there are definitely something for everyone. But I think those who will enjoy this book would have enjoyed Crossman and are those that look to controlling their own destiny.
And I think another reason why this is really appropriate for the security community, which is where Turning Pages is aimed at, is because we're quite curious species, aren't we, really? We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for you, because you introduced me to Gav Schneider. So you've kind of set in course this chain reaction of events, which would
I've
have happened.
introduced you to everyone. What do you mean? It's not just Gav. So
people. Oh, you can have that if you want. I shall move on now. Thank you very much, Adrian, for taking part. Let's move on then to Ari. Ari, what is your summary?
Sure, well, I absolutely love the book. I think it was the missing piece that I needed to compile all the knowledge I had regarding personal safety and risk management and self-defense as well. I absolutely the amount and quality of book recommendations. The anecdotes inserted throughout the chapters are fascinating and really engaging. Some of them actually give me an adrenaline rush. And for some of them, I was kept curious as to how they end. So it would be great to know that sometime. And yes, and there were also a lot of questions that people, both security professionals or not, may ask themselves, for example, regarding about self-defense and martial arts. And I think the book doesn't talk about specific techniques, but rather talks about something that is much more valuable, which is setting realistic and productive expectations and goals for when you are approaching self-defense and martial arts. So I love that. The only thing I could say at the slide, but it's not a big deal, is that the author says he won't get into the way of violent behavior. And then he does talk a bit about that and the influence of media. But I do understand that he felt it was necessary to add that because it's very difficult to talk about violent behavior and not talk about why it happened. So I do understand that.
Yeah, in fact, the why behind violent behavior is a whole other subject, isn't it? And maybe it's a subject that maybe Gav might write another book about. Who knows?
Well, good for another.
Okay, Ari, thank you so much for those comments. I appreciate that. Farah, coming to you then for your summary. Was there anything about the book that maybe didn't quite sit right?
I think this book offers really valuable insights and tools for enhancing your personal and community safety. But I think it's important to remember that we can't, like everything, we can't look at it in a vacuum. I suppose one concern I have is the potential for overconfidence, especially among those who might not have practical experience in security or emergency situations. It brought to mind this idea of these emergency preppers you see on social media who have an inflated sense of their own capability. I saw a quote the other day which resonated on this, and it was modern men sometimes mistakenly feel that they would have done better in medieval times. They are somehow adamant that the chance of them being Genghis Khan is greater than the chance of them being cannon fodder, peasant number 1,373,000, whose favela was sacked and destroyed. I think my point that I'm trying to make is reading about security protocols and actually implementing them effectively under stress are two very different things. I think this book is an excellent starting point, but the real test then comes when you actually have to apply these principles into a real world context. There's a risk of developing a false sense of security that could lead to poor decision making in critical situations. I think this book is undoubtedly a valuable resource. I very much enjoyed it. I recommended it to my mum to read, but I think it should be supplemented with practical training and a bit more of a grounded understanding of people's actual capabilities and limitations.
Yeah, fair point, actually. I think to your point around being overconfident, I know that somebody can read a Lee Child's book and still be overconfident in their abilities. I remember several years ago, like 10 years ago now, my gal pal received a very significant threat from a boyfriend she was breaking up with. And he said he was going to hang her intestines up like Christmas decorations. And I kind of went, yeah, that's a Lee Child's comment. Gosh, that's a comment from, I've just read that book. Is it really? But it was nevertheless.
Well, it's like that statistic that not 80%, but 40% of men believe that they could beat Serena Williams in a tennis match. Good luck with that.
That was proven a long time ago with Billie Jean King, who took that challenge with a male opponent and beat him. And he shook her hand at the end of the match, and it was all in good faith. But nevertheless, why I just provoked now to ask the need why men feel they need to beat Serena Williams. Why?
I completely agree. Just why? But anyway.
Yeah. Nevertheless, my friend left her boyfriend, and he went to prison. Yeah, it was a significant red flag. And I think this is what the book tells you. Being able to recognize when someone can do you harm is about recognizing those red flags and not just thinking it's a flyaway comment. It had a real sinister intent behind it. Coming to you, Pam. Sorry on that note there. True experience. Pam, what's your summary?
Again, very enjoyable book, well organized, well thought out, laid out in a great way for someone to interpret, learn. I agree with Farah. I could see some people without the practice and some skill set thinking that this could be like the panacea, and it's not. It definitely is something. It's, to activate somebody, to get somebody more engaged, but the focus should be on the 80% of prevention and avoidance. And that 10% of action really should be thought about very well, unless you are in a very dire situation and that you've got to do what you got to do. Because at the end, the parasympathetic response is real. The way you react to situations is real. And until you're in it, you really don't know. Like your training exercise, we did plenty of those in the dark, sirens screaming, have to put your gun together in the dark. And then, it's, all this to lump on stress, create that stress situation to see how you're going to react. How are you going to be able to get through? And, but the average person is not even going to comprehend or conceive of that when they're in the situation. And that could potentially put them in harm. But being active and see something, say something, and all that is all excellent. And he lays out a great groundwork for people to understand the whys and wherefores of it and what to do, how to apply it practically.
So I'm going to ask you a question in a second, Pam, 'cause I think I'm an underreactor, 100%. And I remember this from my police training days. And we were in the gymnasium again, all my finest memories. And we had the whole scenario where the man comes in with the padded suit, Mr. Fist, and we have to beat him, hit him, and we have to give good commands like get back, stand back, get back, stand back. I was partnered with, bless her cotton socks, the shortest girl ever, and I'm not exactly tiny. And so we looked a bit like an odd sort. Anyway, when Mr. Fist came into the gymnasium in front of all of my peers, they turned the lights out, and my pal Caroline, who's now very successful as a rocket scientist, she went straight in and she's get back, hit, stand back, hit. And I just stood there watching because she was doing such a great job of it. And the instructor said, engage, PC Hamlet, engage. It's like my brain was like, this doesn't seem logical. She's doing fine. I've got her back. There's no danger here. And that's how I know that's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to practice, yeah? But my brain couldn't get, it's like, how people's brains stop them from jumping out of planes because the brain's going, what are you doing? What are you doing? My brain was doing the same thing. It didn't.
And your brain's going, well, it's just training. I know he's really not a threat, even though he's beating her up. I know he's not going to take it to the next level. But that's where you have to train. You have to train like it's real, like you have to, but dial it back so nobody gets hurt. So it's so true.
I just wasn't angry enough that day.
I remember getting, you get in the corner, they get you, and then you got to be really
prepared,
feisty to get out of it and go for the knees.
I guess it proved that I really didn't have a very instinctive, violent streak in me. So that itself, that exercise taught me an awful lot about how my delaying getting involved with something could actually be more life-threatening than me reacting more sooner. So I've always held that experience to be a very valuable one. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. It's going to bring you all back in the room. Engage! Easy Hamlet, engage! Never forget that. Thank you so much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you also for episode 4. We already know what episode 4 is going to be. So thank you, everybody, for taking part. I really appreciate all of your insights and all of your experiences. It's been very good. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Great day.